Okay, good afternoon, good morning, Year 11. We're going to continue with our overview of the set works for our GCSE music exam. In this video, we're going to kind of talk about and do a close analysis of Release by the band Afro-celt Sound System. The song was released on the 25th of January, 1999.
Okay, so the piece by Afro-celt Sound System falls into our heading of fusions, just like the Esperanza Spalding piece of music. In this case, the three influences that have fused together, we have African music, we have Celtic folk music, and then we have Western dance music, sort of contemporary dance music.
Okay, so the most obvious thing when listening to the beginning of this song is the use of different instrumentation. Really stands out, makes it quite clear for us to start hearing these different influences. So, Mr. Morgan, African forces.
Okay, so the African forces that we can hear, we have the talking drum. This is a drum played holding within your hand and has different sort of strings that are supporting the skin of the drum, which by leaning on with your elbow will actually tighten the head of the drum or loosen it slightly, which means it can vary the pitch that the sound makes, which can be used to imitate the voice, hence the name talking drum. You also have the kora, which is a string instrument played with the strings going upright in front of the player. It would almost look a bit like a harp, but it's kind of a mix between a guitar and a harp in a funny way.
Lovely instrument. Okay, so Celtic forces.
Okay, so we have the hurdy-gurdy, very funny sounding instrument. We have the Eulalian pipes.
Okay, probably worth noticing because I know a few students in my class often talking about bagpipes when they're writing down there. You don't blow down the Eulalian pipes. You kind of play it with a bellow, don't you? So the thing is, you're bellowing the air into the bag. Obviously, a bagpipe you'd be blowing into. So yeah, that's the difference.
We have the bodhran, which is a small circular drum played with a very small stick. We have the fiddle, a violin. I know that we hear a violin in many other settings, but in this case, very, very synonymous with folk music. We also have the small whistle and the accordion.
Fantastic. And finally, the influences or the forces used from Western dance music.
Okay, so here is the use of synthesizers. We have sort of pads played by the synthesizers. So we have these string pads, soft sort of bell pads. It's all very electronic. We have the use of samples. There are some breath samples that have obviously been recorded and then are used. There's drum machines, electric piano, and then there's other percussion that are used within loops.
Fantastic. What I think we should do probably is now have a little screenshot of that list. Okay, so let's quickly talk about the structure. The structure of the song Release is verse form. There are no choruses. So it's intro, verse 1, verse 2, solos, verse 3, build, outro. There we go. Kind of moving across to you. Lovely, very good. So simple, no choruses. And there is an instrumental solo, particularly kind of using a lot of the Celtic ideas. We'll discuss that later.
Just to try and draw two lots of revision together, it's also worth noting, because this will make it easier to remember, both pieces of fusion music that you are studying do not contain choruses. They both just have verses.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that will make it easier because it's one factor, remember, that takes over both of those set works.
Absolutely. So structure, now let's talk about melody. Look, there are quite a few kind of fairly kind of clear things we can talk about melody. We're going to list off just a few of the key features of the melody. We'll put them on a list for you and then we'll discuss them when we are looking at the set work in a bit more detail, playing it through. So first of all, melody, there's the use of nonsense lyrics. So there are parts in the song where we hear particularly the male singer in places kind of singing kind of nonsensical words, just kind of essentially sounds or kind of vocalizations. The main part of the verse is syllabic. That means that there's a syllable to each note. And there are a few bits where it's kind of spoken word as well.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that the phrases of the melody throughout the piece are all very, very short. But then what we are finding then is that there's a lot of repetition, and obviously we're hearing that through the use of the loops as well. The female sings at the beginning, verse 1, is the male voice that comes into verse 2, and it is worth noting the way that the range of the voice varies. Much more limited when the female is singing, and I think it's actually limited to a sixth, so only sort of 6 notes away from the lowest note she sings to the highest, whereas actually the male singer has a slightly more extended range of a 13th.
Okay, yeah, very good. So the idea being here that, these kind of vocal kind of sort of bits we hear, also use of samples. So there are moments where there's some kind of breath sound, some other kind of sort of ideas where they're just using small little loops or samples from previous recorded material that they're putting into the song. We also get quite a lot of this kind of glissando kind of style singing. What glissando is when you kind of move smoothly from one note to the next without kind of breaking the sound. We hear quite a lot of that in some of the entries for both the singers.
Yeah, I mean, that's like a slide, the way that they're sort of sliding from one note to the other. There is some ornamentation within the melody where you get acciaccaturas, and that can be found obviously with the instrumental melodic content as well. And basically, throughout the recording of the piece, the melody, in terms of a studio effect, often has an awful lot of reverb, which is obvious throughout the whole track. We're going to put those points onto a set of bullet points, which are going to come up, and we'll meet you in a minute to talk a little bit more about the texture.
Okay, just following on from melody there, it is worth just pointing out that the instrumental solo that we hear, definitely kind of rooted in the Celtic folk tradition, is idiomatic for the instruments that they're written on. So those kind of sounds that we're hearing are appropriate for particularly the playing of, for example, the Eulalian pipes. We're now going to talk about texture. So the texture is changing constantly through this set work. Main reason for that is the use of loops. So the loop is a repeated small piece of material that is then kind of heard in different places and throughout and used throughout the piece. There's a lot of examples of loops in this piece which kind of drop in and out, which means we get quite a lot of variation of the texture. Starts off when the first vocal comes in a homophonic texture, clear melody with accompaniment, but there are some moments where that changes.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Mr. Morgan's mentioned, the layers of sound are constantly changing with how many of these loops are being used at any one time. Mainly homophonic throughout this piece, as mentioned, but there are slight variations. A good example can be found at the beginning of verse 3. This is after the solos have had their sort of moment in the sun, but what you'll notice is that the solo lines carry on going while the female vocalist has come back in with verse 3. So obviously then we now have polyphonic texture because we have more than one melodic idea that are happening at the same time.
Absolutely. Then towards the end, particularly as we get into the outro, we start hearing a heterophonic texture. This heterophonic texture is particularly heard between the Eulalian pipes
and the hurdy-gurdy.
The idea of heterophonic texture is when we kind of get maybe small variations of the same melody. This comes back to the Celtic tradition, the kind of oral tradition of learning melodies by ear. So people will have learned a set sort of melodies, but there may be some variation in how they've been passed on.
Yeah, just like before, actually, it is easier with the information on this piece to just list some of the things that we've just spoken about so that you can help with any notes that you might be taking at the moment for your revision. So that's going to come up on the screen as we speak, and we will be back in just a second.
Okay, wonderful. We're going to quickly talk about the harmony and tonality, which we hear in the piece. So essentially it's diatonic. That means it kind of falls within a key center. The harmony is kind of from that key center. It's in the key of C minor. And generally, however, we would describe this as being modal.
Yeah, I'm just going to interject there because you are right. It is diatonic because it is based in this key, but there is no other movement to anything else or any modulation.
So it's static.
Yeah, so it's static harmony, and it's really based on this minor scale, which is why we get the term modal.
Okay, just going to point out just for a few of you there that there are two main modes that are used in this. Predominantly it uses the Aeolian mode. The Aeolian mode is the sixth mode of the major scale. So if you, for instance, were doing your C major scale, if you started on an A and went A to A, that would be the Aeolian mode. Essentially, it's a minor scale with a flat sixth and a flat seventh. When we get to the instrumental solo, we're hearing the Dorian mode. The Dorian mode is the second mode of the major scale, minor with a flattened seventh.
Yeah, so that's where they are derived from. But yes, the tonality here is C. So that is C Aeolian scale and C Dorian scale, which you can hear. But the most important thing, C minor modal. Yeah.
The chord sequence is, we said that, I mean, it's essentially very repetitive, very static. There are some hints of chromaticism, particularly we hear that in the instrumental solos, the use of some kind of occasional chromatic sort of notes, that maybe occasional passing notes that aren't in the original scale.
There are some extended chords. This is now a term I hope that you are incredibly familiar with, as it appears in many of our set works. This is when you have what would be a very standard sort of triad chord that has then got further notes added to it to extend the chord.
And finally, we hear a lot of, there's a big use of the drone, a drone within the piece of music. We've spoken about a drone in some of our other set works. Essentially, we actually haven't spoken about drone, we've talked about pedals, but it kind of follows a similar principle.
Yeah, and actually this is really important because I know students at my school sometimes get confused between the pedal and the drone. The pedal note in some of our other pieces, Beethoven, for example,
Star Wars.
In Star Wars, inverted pedal in Star Wars a lot as well. But what is happening is that one note is staying while harmony is changing, which is creating particular effect in the harmony. Where this case, I would absolutely call this a drone because the harmony is not being, nothing is happening with the harmony because it's very static. So nothing else.
One note. All the way through.
So it's not implying anything else with this note staying. It's just a drone, a C tonic drone that is happening all throughout the piece, or certainly a lot.
We'll put a list of those bullet points, and then we're going to quickly follow up with talking about the tempo and meter. Okay, brilliant. So we've got to our final bit. We're going to talk about the kind of tempo, meter, and maybe some of the rhythms that we're hearing. So first of all, it starts in free time at the very beginning. No kind of set pulse to begin with, kind of quite a moody kind of start to the music. And then we kind of get this kind of steady tempo getting introduced kind of around kind of the 50-second minute mark. And it is at 100 beats per minute. So kind of like I guess it kind of slightly dance kind of tempo, which again is from our Western influence.
Yeah. So when that starts, we are in a very, what we would describe as a simple quadruple meter, but it is in 4/4. Basically, there are 4 crotchet beats per bar. It is worth noting that the semiquaver lines that happen are slightly swung, meaning that the sort of note on the beat or the stronger beat within that is slightly longer than the offbeat. This gives it quite a lilting quality, which again would sort of hark to the folk influences. There's syncopation, which means that there are lots of offbeat phrases.
Absolutely, and again, a lot of that kind of offbeat notes, the syncopation, again, African influence, we're hearing a lot of that on the talking drum, particularly the use of triplets. Triplets, nice, where 3 would be in the place of 2, and then essentially, those sort of movements, can really can drive the music forward.
Yeah, there's a lot of rhythmic ostinato. We know an ostinato is a repeating phrase. It is worth pointing out that there's also melodic ostinato with the use of the loops. But in this case, when we're talking about the rhythmometer, there is rhythmic ostinato.
Yeah, good. So we know obviously the use of loops is there. There's quite a lot of sextuplets. We hear that particularly a lot in the kind of folk influence kind of lines. Particularly hear it very predominantly with a lot of semi-quaver lines as well in the instrumental solo.
Yeah, the rhythmic phrases throughout this piece really are quite short. Okay, they're quite short phrases, and they can mostly be broken up into 2 or 4 bar phrases. So we're going to put that list up so that you can see that very quickly to help with your revision notes, and then you are going to be able to follow through the tune while it's being played, and a lot of those riffs appearing on your screen as and when they turn up in the piece. So enjoy listening, and good luck with your revision.
Okay, so we can hear it starts with the synth drone and hard panning. That means we can hear it in either the left or the right hand.
It is worth mentioning that both synths are being filtered with these filters, which means it's basically sweeping through the different frequencies. That's really the main thing to remember. It's just an electronic device being used in the studio.
Okay, there's some vocal samples heard, some spoken word.
The music did start obviously in free time, but slowly the textures are being increased with the talking drum, and we are going to start hearing the bodhran playing, which is now helping us establish the tempo, which you can see in front of you now.
Okay, so you can see the score is made up of lots of different loops, so these loop sections keep coming in and out. So here we're hearing loop 1, 2 and 3.
Yeah, we have our shaker and our bodhran, and then our drums.
Notice the use of triplets and syncopation. Okay, so here we're seeing some vocalization by the female vocalist Sinead O'Connor, kind of improvised, allowing the texture to kind of build as we move towards the start of verse 1.
Yep. Here's some synth strings, so we've got these pads being used.
Okay, we're now into verse 1, and we can hear the female vocal beginning.
As you can see on the screen, this is a limited range of only a sixth, and you can see these short 2-bar phrases.
Absolutely homophonic texture, clear melody with accompaniment.
Okay, we can now hear the kora, that African string instrument that is joining in with the synth strings. We're nearing the end of verse 1, where there is a short instrumental part, which is here. We can see the use of those breath samples and this bass loop that is being played. This will lead us into the beginning of verse 2.
Okay, so now we're into verse 2. We hear now the male vocal taking over, kind of singing a variation of verse 1. There's a much more complicated drum pattern, loop 14, which we are hearing. Appears with a fiddle playing an accompaniment using double stopping.
Yeah, that means that they're playing 2 notes at once.
Towards the end, we're going to hear a low chromatic synth string enter. A short drum and bass link is then going to lead on to the solo.
Okay, this is the solo section starting. We have the ukulele pipes that do the first solo.
Okay, also then joined by the whistle, an octave higher. We see a lot of semiquavers, the occasional use of glissandos, talked about earlier, and the solos are accompanied by the accordion loop and also by the bowline.
Okay, the solo continues with the low whistle, playing a more complicated version of the ukulele pipe solo. It's a little bit more varied in rhythm, and there's a bit more variety.
Okay, towards the end, we're getting this male vocal coming in, playing short phrases, which are joined by the hurdy-gurdy and bass.
So the hurdy-gurdy is now playing a solo passage. This is going to lead us back into verse 3 shortly.
Okay, we're now moving into verse 3. We're hearing the return of the female vocal. Sinead O'Connor's back in. However, we can hear that the hurdy-gurdy and ukulele pipe solo is still playing underneath. This is creating a polyphonic texture.
Okay, the male vocal has taken over towards the end of verse 3 here, accompanied by the fiddle, which is playing with them with the chromatic low synth strings. Okay, the bowline can be heard entering, playing its original entry, and this leads to the build-up.
Okay, so the bass re-enters, slightly more complicated drum part. Laid on top is an electric piano playing a syncopated 2-note melody, and then you also hear a second electric piano playing like an oscillating pattern using 2 notes, E flat and F.
Yeah, the 2 electric piano loops drop out as a new hurdy-gurdy loop enters. Okay, there's now a heterophonic texture between the ukulele pipes and the hurdy-gurdy. You can see both of them there at the top of the screen. Slight variations, but of effectively the same melodic content.
Okay, so we're now moving into the outro. You hear the female voice singing "Reach Out and You'll Touch Me" was figure 2, and then the bass loop drops out and the second fiddle loop re-enters.
Yeah, at the end, the 2 electric piano loops enter, as well as the other troops dropping out, and then the music fades out.